Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements Podcast. I am your host, Joe Manganiello. This will be a fun podcast today as we continue our series of 2025 WNBA free agency recaps. Recording here in early March. These episodes are going to go live a little later this month, several weeks ahead of the WNBA draft. And as WNBA fans know, the offseason is a ever-evolving process, has a start time, has an end time, but the draft plays such a pivotal role in how WNBA teams fill out their rosters. And free agency is always a game for the elites. You know, the best teams are going to sign the best free agents, and then rosters are kind of filled out down the line from there. We're going to talk about two teams together in this episode, and I'm doing it that way because although these two franchises have many distinctions, one thing that they have in common is that the majority of analysts, fans, prognosticators are going to pick these two teams to be at the bottom of the league in 2025. We're talking about the Washington Mystics and expansion franchise, the Golden State Valkyries, making their debut season in the W. But to get things started here, I want to go a little more theoretical, be a little bit more creative. A lot of basketball fans enjoy video games and enjoy NBA 2K. WNBA talent has been incorporated into the game in more recent editions, which is awesome. Growing up as a kid, I actually loved NBA Live, and then eventually as PlayStation models, I think it was PS3 when 2K really separated itself as the preeminent basketball video game. And I'm a sicko in a lot of ways. I mean, as you're getting to know me here in season 1 of the CBA podcast, I love transactions. I love the analytics. I love being analytical. I'm a basketball fan through and through. I love the game. And with video games, basketball video games, it's so fun to be able to step into the bodies of these athletes, control the basketball. I've even done modes where you lock onto a position and you can play off the ball, which is real sicko stuff. But my favorite thing to do, and when I was more of a general sports fan, I would do this with Madden for football. I would do this with baseball games. Never really got into the hockey games as much. And there's other sports video games, but with basketball video games in particular, my favorite thing to do are dynasties. Our MyLeague, I believe, is now the naming device for that. And typically, my favorite thing to do, happy to put you on. If anyone needs a consultant for video game dynasty mode, MyLeague mode, I would happily accept a nominal fee to be your phantom GM. Set up a fantasy draft. You can do 30 teams if it's the NBA. You could expand into 32 franchises from day one. There's plenty of rules and settings that you can tinker with. But go into the fantasy draft with the mindset that you're going to tank in year one. Now, maybe I'm going to lose some of you right off rip by talking that way, but it's a video game. Stay with me. Be creative. Be theoretical. So, fantasy draft, and you go into that environment with two kind of overarching philosophies. Assuming that you're not going to get the number 1 overall pick, or maybe more broadly, you're going to go out of your way to be a middle draft pick, maybe even a late draft pick. You're going in with two mindsets. You want to draft youth, and you want to draft players on contracts that you know have positive trade value that you can move in season. Because during this year, between day one and the trade deadline, you are going to be making trades. And it is so, so fun to go to Trade Finder, especially after the trade restrictions. In the NBA, there's a rule. You can't trade recently signed players until approximately 2 months into the year, about December from the October start date. So once trade restrictions are lifted, once you're able to really assess the market, You start moving players to contending teams. You take their draft picks, first, seconds, whatever you can get. You're trading veterans for younger players. You see how your players are doing. Make some assessments. Oh, this guy's playing really well. Let me see if I can trade him at peak value. Then you go into that first off season. If you've done it correctly, you have cap space, you have draft picks, and then you can really start to chart a course. And if you really are a sicko, you might even do a 2-year rebuild off rip. So that third year, you are just flush with cash, picks, developing talent. And it's so fun because it's a video game, so there's not the real world stakes of keeping your job and selling tickets and everything real. But it's so fun because you get to go through the exercise of building a great basketball team, thinking about what do you love most about your favorite basketball teams? And if you were going to be building a team from scratch, what are you going to go out of your way to find? So I want to rattle off a few concepts, basketball philosophies of mine. Would be happy to hear from folks on where they differentiate, whether or not they've done this video game exercise, just sort of thinking out loud about what they love most about basketball. So for me, when I think about basketball, 10-foot hoop, fixed dimensions, height, size, strength matter. And on the defensive end of the floor in particular, the center position is very, very important. Thinking about this with like Nikola Jokic, for example. Nikola Jokic is a historic offensive player, but earlier in his career, the theory was you could never win with a center that isn't elite on the defensive end. And I think Jokic has come into his own. He's an excellent rebounder. He uses his size well, and especially in the biggest games, I don't think that he is so slow of foot. So I think Jokic is good enough on the defensive end now. There's a established floor where, of course, he's overwhelmingly positive, and we could lose track of things if we keep going down that direction. But for me, I look at the center position as a vital, critical role, but not necessarily where I would want my franchise player to be. And what I really mean is I want someone who is specifically elite on defense. I want someone who is an elite rebounder and or brings incredible size to the table. They need to be athletic enough so that they can cover ground on the defensive end. If we're in a pick and roll and it's the right matchup, they have the ability to trap high and then get back to the paint. And offensively, I'm looking for somebody that is a great screen setter, who can catch the ball, great big hands, can dive to the rim and get layups and score well inside. Anything above that is gravy. If this center is able to hit threes, great. If they're able to pass at a plus level or an exceptional level, great. But center, to me, defensive position. Let's go to the opposite end of the lineup. Point guards. Point guard, very, very important. Big point guard guy here. Now, that doesn't mean that you need your point guard to be nominal, traditional in every sense. Historically speaking of what a point guard is, I think that there now more than ever are examples in both the W and the NBA of point forwards. And just watch Juju Watkins at USC right now to see the advantages that you can have when your lead initiator is a bigger player. LeBron James. I mean, what LeBron James did was break the convention of what it means to be a floor general, playmaking, lead ball initiator. But you're also 6'8", 250, the fastest player in the league. Like, the advantage is every single night on the floor, overwhelm teams. You're going to do well in the regular season. You're going to go into playoff series with a huge advantage, right? Point guard is a calling to get spiritual. It's a calling. The vision, the leadership. say what you want about Chris Paul, but there's a reason why they call him the point god, because he brings these intangibles and the intelligence to the table that is archetypal in a way for like your great point guard. Steve Nash, great example. I want my point guard to be able to shoot the basketball, specifically someone who can spot up off the ball, who can get rid of the rock, relocate to other places on the floor, and stretch the defense out from the corner, deep in the wing. Mike Conley is a great example of an ideal point guard for me, a sub all-star point guard. Courtney Vandersloot on these recent Liberty teams is a great point guard to me. Someone that can push the ball up tempo, fast break transition, but can also competently run high screen and roll actions in the half court. And where I would distinguish between point guard and shooting guard is point guard to me doesn't have to be the superstar of the team, doesn't have to be the number one option. But my point guard should be one of the 2 or 3 best players in the team, should be one of the leading scorers and shot takers on the team, someone that can create for themselves and others. And if I get the right type of forward, small forward type player that can really take on responsibilities as a playmaker, then that takes pressure off that point guard being a star. Whereas for me, a shooting guard, and this has evolved over time. I mean, when you look at the history of the NBA, shooting guards used to be the dominant position. Obviously, that peaked with Michael Jordan, and then there was a post-Jordan residue in the NBA for quite some time. Kobe Bryant was excellent. Dwayne Wade was excellent. And now I think today, DeMar DeRozan has I think, shifted into a different stage of his career. I would consider him more of a small forward, especially on the defensive end. But DeMar DeRozan, I think, kind of comes up as that example of a wing that isn't a point guard and isn't big enough to change the game in the way that a Jason Tatum at forward does. And yet a 2-guard that is crafty, can slip in and out, find their spots in the mid-range, can get all the way to the basket, can get fouled. Devin Booker is one of the best 2 guards in the league right now and obviously is a star. In my team build, though, shooting guard is a role. It is not negotiable. I need my shooting guard to be an elite shooter, a marksman, absolutely. Ideally, both my 1 and my 2 are going to be so good at shooting the basketball that it takes pressure off my 3, 4, 5 slots for being elite shooters. I think where teams can get in trouble is if you don't have excellent shooting in your backcourt, then you really need stretch 4 and stretch 5 play. And I would rather have the benefit of my 1, 2, 3, and maybe even my 1 through 4 slots being shooters, so that if my center that I'm investing in is not a shooter, it's all good. At least 4 good shooters on the floor at any given time. And then kind of rounding things out here, because I don't want to get too didactic. Small forward is a critical position. Some of the best players in basketball history are small forwards. And I want my small forward to be as good on the defensive end as the offensive end. In other words, I want to be able to go into a playoff series and know that if they have a stud at the 3, that I have somebody that can guard that player. Now, where things can get creative is, let's look at Cleveland, the Cleveland Cavaliers, for example. Evan Mobley is so valuable because he can credibly guard 3s, 4s, and 5s. And I think in this upcoming postseason, what we're going to see is he is going to be guarding Jason Tatum a lot of the time. Cleveland, notably, doesn't have an elite wing defender. And they're actually really small in their backcourt. So they built their team with Mobley at the 4, Jared Allen at the 5. They made a very heady trade earlier this year to get DeAndre Hunter on the wing. But he's an offensive first guy, not a defensive star, especially as injuries have eroded some of his physical tools. I love these concepts and these questions of, if we have this type of player at the 5, what type of backcourt do we need to have? If we have 2 great shooters in the backcourt, how creative can we get in terms of being defensive oriented at the forward and center spots? These are great questions, great exercises. We'd be happy to go more in depth on this in another pod. But I'm going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the Mystics first. The Mystics are a team that have been humbled in recent seasons. They have a very pivotal draft coming up in April. And inevitably, they're going to finish outside of the postseason this year in the W. But what type of development can they establish on the floor in 2025? That's coming up next. All right, we're back. Let's talk Mystics. 2024 wasn't a great year, 14-26, fifth place in the WNBA Eastern Conference. They did not make the playoffs. They actually were only 8th place in net rating, minus 3.7. So they weren't the absolute worst team in terms of net rating. That was in large part because they had a middle-of-the-pack defense, a defensive rating of 103.4. It was their offensive rating that really held them back, though, a 99.7, 9th in the WNBA. And just to stress this again, with offensive rating, defensive rating, this is based off of per 100 possessions. So that stat, 99.7, means that they're scoring 99.7 points per 100 possessions. In the NBA, we've seen that offensive rating stat jump all the way up to now the best teams are closer to 120 per 100. Defensive rating in the WNBA can get a little wonky. You know, I think if you're anywhere close to 100, you're in good position. So in this case, the Mystics, they had a below average defense, but then they had a really subpar offensive team. We look at where they find themselves in their financial fundamentals. They have 4 guaranteed contracts on the books, including a 4th-year option they picked up for Shakira Austin. They have 7 unguaranteed contracts, 1 open roster spot, and there definitely is going to be some volatility at the bottom of their roster. We'll see who exactly they take into training camp. They have $723,000 in cap space, so they have plenty of money to move around. And let's rattle this off. 2025 draft, they have the number 3 pick, the number 4 pick, the number 6 pick, the number 23 pick, and the number 32 pick. It'll be very difficult for them to draft 5 players and roster them this year. My guess is that especially that 3rd-round pick will be a draft and stash international rights. But they're in a position where, especially if they like who they get at 23, you know, they absolutely could draft those first 4 players and roster them. Now, they've been able to acquire some of that additional draft capital in trades, and they've been, I think, really strategic on coming into this offseason, coming into this draft, knowing that it's time to inject some youth and some future star potential into the team. Now, they most recently acquired the number 3 pick in a trade with the Chicago Sky, moving Ariel Atkins off the team. We talked about that trade in the Chicago episode and more anticipating how Atkins would fit in there. I think it was a no-brainer for Washington to do that move. But what an opportunity for this franchise to have 3 selections in the first 6 picks of a great draft. You know, they are really starting from, they're starting as close to 0 as a team that's been in the league for many years can. I mean, this is a real true reset this time around. I think last year there was maybe some potential of they could overachieve, but for background, you know, the Mystics won the championship in 2019. Then they proceeded to lose in the first round in 2020. They missed the playoffs in 2021. They lose in the first round in 22 and 23. And this is where we got to talk about briefly their franchise player, their former franchise player, Elena Deladon. She is now 35 years old, superstar, one of the best players of all time, 2-time MVP, 5-time All WNBA. But 2023 was her last year. She was an all-star. But it does not appear that she's going to be back for the Mystics. And I guess it is kind of a cruel irony, right? The fall off for them is in large part because they don't have Deladon. But Deladon isn't interested in playing in the W because she would have to play for the Mystics. And she knows that she doesn't have a great chance at winning another title. She already has one, so she isn't necessarily motivated to win more, and the Mystics certainly wouldn't want to trade her to another team. Last year, the Mystics had the worst turnover rate in the W, the second worst rebounding team. Now, Brittany Sykes did miss a lot of time, but offensively, I mean, Mystics were one of the worst pull-up shooting teams. They lacked on-ball creation. They started the year 0-11. And Ariel Atkins, who I mentioned before, she was the last player from that title team left on the roster. And so finding a way to trade her and turn that into the number 3 pick was outstanding work by them. Now, one thing that I really do credit the Mystics for last year in what was otherwise a lost year, they were number 2 in three-point rate, three-point percentage, and assist rate. So they finished strong, right? They started 0-11, but they finished the year strong. And even though their offensive numbers were dismal, they were actually shooting well, and schematically, they were finding ways to get good shots up. And I think that's going to be a really, really critical thing to continue, a trend to continue in 2025, where most likely, and this is just from a really high level, where this isn't a mock draft episode, we're not going in depth on these picks, but they're going to have an opportunity with the number 3 pick to draft, most likely, draft one of the 2 really great guards at Notre Dame right now, Olivia Miles, or more likely, Sonia Citron. And then they're going to have an opportunity to draft a very, very talented player with size and athleticism, either forward Kiki Iriafen or the big Dominique Malanga. And if either of those 2 players are available at 3 or 4 and being able to grab a shooter plus a player of size, that would be an outstanding outcome for them. And then we'll see also who's available at 6. Notably, last year with the number 6 overall pick, they were able to draft Aaliyah Edwards, 6'3". She was outstanding during Unrivaled this year, particularly in the one-on-one tournament. Shifty Misty. And look, 9.3 rebounds and 2.5 stocks, steals and blocks per 36 minutes a season ago as a rookie. This is someone with a lot of upside. Can play the 3 or the 4. I think if you can find a big of the future and a couple guards for the future, you put Edwards out there. I mentioned Shakira Austin earlier. She's shown a lot of promise, especially as an athlete with defensive upside, the ability to drive to the basket. She's going to be a restricted free agent in 2026, so it'll be relatively straightforward for the Mystics to be able to retain her. Her per 36 minutes stats from a season ago, 12.4 rebounds and 4 stocks per game, or per 36 minutes, rather. So let's play Edwards and Austin as much as possible. Let's play the rookies as much as possible. I also want to shout out Stephanie Dolson, beloved veteran, incredible player, both at UConn and in the pros. And then also age 24, Emily Engstler. These 2 bigs for the Mystics are really good shooters. Both of them were over 60% true shooting as bigs. And so at the beginning of the episode, I was talking about my ideal center is a defensive stalwart, rim runner, and is really someone that dominates the paint. But alternatively, if you're a rebuilding team, I actually think there's a lot of value to have players like Dolson and Engstler. And of course, Engstler's young enough. She's only 24. I mean, she could be on this team long term. But with Dolson in particular, culture setter, and then on the offensive end, someone who's so smart and someone who's able to find the right spots on the floor to be, especially getting behind the line and threatening the pick and pop or spot up 3-point shots, that's going to open up the driving lane for players like Edwards, Austin, and then these rookies. So I really like how the Mystics are going about things. Even before they make these draft picks, I would say the Mystics have had, a strong offseason because they know the assignment. They're rebuilding. 2025 is not going to be the next great Mystics season. They're not assuming that Elena Deladonna is coming back. And so I'm excited to see what they do. I'll also call attention to Brittany Sykes. She has a $195,000 salary, age 30. If they could find a trade partner that really values Sykes, that wants another guard, a starting caliber player, I would not be shocked if they find a trade partner for Sykes. She might even prefer that. But otherwise, really, really excited for this season for the Mystics, a young team that is I think, admitted where they are and they're doing the right things. And lastly, I just want to spend a little bit of time on the Golden State Valkyries. I mean, they didn't play last year. This is going to be their first season coming up in 2025. And as an expansion team, we only know so much about what their roster is going to really look like. For example, they only have 3 guaranteed contracts on the books. Tiffany Hayes for $200,000 comes over as a free agent. And good for her. Tip getting the big payday and is going to have plenty of playing time. Wouldn't be shocked if she's traded in season to a contender. Stephanie Talbot and Kayla Thornton, who they drafted Kayla in the expansion draft away from the Liberty. And Monique Billings is also a guaranteed contract, $110,000. I should have said, by the way, Tiffany Hayes is an unprotected deal. So again, just for background, that means that if Tiffany Hayes were to miss time due to injury, Golden State is not on the hook to pay Tiffany all of that money. So there is some risk on the player's part there. Guaranteed contracts were Talbot, Thornton, and Billings. And in general, Golden State in the expansion draft, they prioritize IQ, experience in a lot of cases. So like Kayla Thornton was who they took from the Liberty, not Marquisha Davis, the younger player, right? So they want Kayla and Monique and Stephanie to come in and set a tone culturally right away. $727,000 in cap space left to play with. Golden State has the number 5 pick, the number 17, and the number 30. Would not be surprised if they use all 3 picks on rosterable players, get them over, onto the W roster from day one. Maybe that 3rd round pick will end up being an international rights pick. But for head coach Natalie Nakase, like I'm just excited to see what she does with what she has, and we're not going to know what she has quite yet until at least after the draft. But as I mentioned, the emphasis so far was on quick processors, good shooting, high IQ, established versatility. I really enjoy how they went about the point guard position in the expansion draft. Julie Van Loo is somebody that I really think is quite good. 6.7 assists per 36 minutes so far in the W. Carla Latte, French player, was the former number 9 pick. And she's actually signed to a 3-year deal. So rookie scale contract there for Golden State long-term. Going to be interested to see if Golden State comes to an agreement with Temi Fogbenle. That's, a player from Indiana, an immediate defensive anchor, age 32, 6'4". Now, they already have a lot of size from the players I mentioned before, but I think Temi could be another great asset for them in terms of establishing a defensive culture, not being a team that just gets run over every night. I mentioned Tip Hayes already, 2024 Sixth Player of the Year, going to Golden State for a big payday, and the veteran forwards on the team. I think Golden State's going to show up in the league and say, hey, you can't just expect to score 100 points on us. Like, we're going to play defense. I think the real question is, how good offensively are they going to be? For example, I'm a big Kate Martin fan coming out of Iowa, playing with Caitlin Clark in college. She comes to the W and I think really impressed people on how competent she is on both ends of the floor and is a really good shooter. She's a role player, not a future star necessarily. Van Loo and Latte and maybe some of these other guards that they have rights for, can they have enough production on the perimeter and in the pick and roll to make a difference offensively in the first year? We'll see. But to bring everything together in this episode, I'm really excited for both of these franchises. I'm envious because it's so fun to be in that position to say, hey, we're really starting from the beginning. Our fans understand that it's the beginning of a process. How are we going to build this thing? What breaks are we going to catch along the way? What hardships and obstacles are we going to face? And I think both for Washington, but especially Golden State, it's not the end of the world if you lose a bunch of games this year, because the number 1 pick in 2026 figures to be a critical pick for the future of the WNBA. Wouldn't be the end of the world to get the 2027 number 1 pick too, because that's the first draft that Juju Watkins will be eligible for. But I think that these fan bases should be patient and should be excited about what their futures look like. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Plenty of other 2025 free agency recap coverage here in this first season of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast to listen to. And thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. I'm Joe Manganiello. Thanks for listening.